Welcome back to Boilers in the Stands. I am your host, Joe Jackson. Alongside me, as always, is my co-host, Kraig Bowers. We are back for our final preview. This is going up in the year of 2024, but it'll be for the first game of 2025. Purdue takes on the Minnesota Golden Gophers at Minnesota, January 2nd, Thursday, and that is an 8 p.m. Eastern time tip on FS1. It's Big Ten play from here on out. 18 straight games of Big Ten play for Purdue. They are already 1-1 within the conference, but it is going to be a grind. We'll dive into it. Minnesota's one of the two, I think, consensus worst teams in the Big Ten. And in terms of tournaments, like making the tournament and stuff like that, it's not a must win. But it does, even this early in the season, it does feel like if you want to compete for the Big Ten title, like this, Minnesota is a team you kind of have to beat. And so on the road at Minnesota, Purdue gets the, I would say, fortunate draw of getting Minnesota as one of their road games. But it's Big Ten play. They have Dawson Garcia. They have Mike Mitchell. Like, they have dudes that can go off. So it is by no means just an easy cakewalk type game. So we'll break down everything that you need to know for this game. Make sure to please like, subscribe. If you turn on bell notifications, you will be notified as soon as we go live for the post-game show following the final buzzer. With it being a road game, should be live pretty much right at the end of the final buzzer. So, Kraig, throw it to you. Purdue getting back into Big Ten play. How are you feeling kind of about them, or just overall thoughts on this Minnesota game?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to get into the meat of Big Ten play. And I mean, the non-conference schedule every year, I think, is great because it kind of provides a measuring stick for where your team stands nationally at that given point in time, right? At that point in that window of the season, there's obviously a ton of room for growth yet, but you get to measure yourself against everybody else. But now we get into the meat of the conference season. And Matt Painter will tell you every single year that the first and number one goal for Purdue basketball is to win a Big Ten regular season title. So this is kind of that next step after playing two early games towards that journey of trying to compete for another Big Ten title and hang another banner. I never want to talk about a game being a necessarily must win at this point in the season. But I think this is a game that Purdue has to win just because Minnesota, along with Washington, obviously, like you said, are two probably unanimously worst teams in the Big Ten in terms of people's perceptions of those teams. And there's only so many road games you're going to get, right? This is a little bit different Purdue team than last year. So you hope to, go 5-5, 6-4 on the road in Big Ten play. And that's probably good enough if you hold court at home to go ahead and win a Big Ten title. And you got to knock off the road wins against teams that you should. Minnesota comes in at 154th in the net. They are 113th in KenPom. And while their record is 8-5, right, and Purdue's is 9-4 right now, right on the surface, one game apart, those records are very, very different. Couldn't be more different, right? Minnesota has played the 303rd worst schedule, according to KenPom, coming into this game, whereas Purdue has a really high strength of schedule. We've already talked about all the quad 1A games that Purdue has played. Minnesota's best win coming into this game is against Yale, who's 99th in the net right now. So it's really a Minnesota team that they should be able to knock off on the road.
Yeah, that's where this is at, and Purdue has to be able to go on the road, get out a W to start Big Ten play, and we talked about it on the post-game show following the Toledo. Like, this is a stretch that Purdue needs to take care of business. That starts with Minnesota, a team that's beat one top 100 KenPom team, two top 200 KenPom teams. That would be 93rd ranked Yale and 198th ranked Cleveland State. They haven't lost to anybody, or they haven't beat anybody that is ranked higher than them in KenPom. They're 113th. All five of their losses have come to teams ranked higher than them currently in KenPom. Obviously, Purdue falls in that category. So let's dive into, I guess, some of the roster, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the overview of Minnesota. Unless you had something more.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add one more thing on there in terms of looking at their record. We talked a little bit about the net yesterday, right? But they are 0-2 in quad 1 games. but they are also 0-2 in quad 2 games and only
Yep.
1-1 in quad 3 games. So what that tells you is that the vast majority of their wins have come against quad 4. So this is a game that I think they definitely have to win. Just a little bit more big picture stuff, Joe. This is a team that plays extremely slow. They're 360th in tempo. I don't know exactly how many teams there are, Joe. Do you? But that's
364.
yes. Okay. So they are officially the fourth fastest or fourth to last, whatever,
Fourth
slowest
slowest
playing
team.
team.
Yeah.
Yes. I didn't get enough sleep last night, Joe.
Fair enough.
In the country. Also, a team that doesn't shoot the three ball well, 30.5% from three. That's 282nd in the country, according to Sports Reference. And they don't necessarily take a lot of attempts from there either. 229th in the country in terms of 3-point attempts per game. They are a team that passes the ball extremely well, though. They're ranked 7th in the entire country in terms of assist percentage. So a team that will share the ball really effectively, and we'll kind of get into how they do that a little bit later on. Is there any big picture thing in terms of just what type of style Minnesota wants to play with, either offensively or defensively, that you want to point out?
Yeah, so you mentioned they slow games down on both ends of the floor. They are going to walk up the ball. They are going to oftentimes get to 5, 6, 7 seconds left on the shot clock. They may not even start their action until 18 to 20 seconds left on the shot clock. It is they like especially in a game like this, and for a team like Minnesota where right there, I think they're only favored against Washington the rest of the way. Uh, they want to slow games down, limit possessions, and they're fine. I mean, they beat Yale 59 to 56. They beat Cleveland State 58 to 47. They lost to Wake Forest 57 to 51. They are fine keeping the games in the 50s, 60s types. That Dawson Garcia is the main dude. We'll dive more like player personnel in a sec, but just the overview. A lot of the offense runs through him. They'll get him post touches. They'll get him the ball in the elbow, and just kind of let him cook from there. Mike Mitchell will be one of the main guys running pick and rolls. Him and Lukai Patterson have split some of that. Femi Udakali as well. It's basically offensively either like a pick and roll or just some sort of look to try to get Garcia anywhere from the low to the high block. And then defensively, they are a team that they're going to high hedge every ball screen. That's what they've done all year. I think I think that maybe strikes some fear into Purdue fans just hearing that immediately, but their backside defensive stuff is not anywhere near what Penn State or Maryland or Auburn or Texas A&M is. And so they do a pretty good job, even with the high hedge of they get the ball out of the point guard's hands, but what they give up on that is a lot of shots in the paint, a lot of shots in the rim or at the rim. So that's kind of what they want to do defensively, grind things out, make you have to keep moving the ball. But they don't always have the athleticism and the rotations to really cover.
Right. And even with that high hedge, not really a team that necessarily turns people over. Only 9.5% steal percentage, 202nd in the country. So not a team that's necessarily going to force a lot of turnovers that shouldn't be striking any fear into Purdue fans' heart from that standpoint. This is not Penn State. This is not Auburn
A&M,
or somebody
yeah.
like A&M. Yeah, A&M. That's where I was going with that. Nobody like that. This is a really old team. They rank 9th, if I didn't already mention that, in experience in the country. Lots and lots of seniors on this team, both from kind of who they've cultured through their program and also who they've brought in from a transfer portal. So let's dive into some of those players a little bit. You've already mentioned a few of them. Let's kind of look at the guard and wing room first. Mike Mitchell Jr. is a senior, 6'2" guard. Purdue fans should remember him from last year as he kind of really took it at Purdue, averaging 13.3 points a game and 3.7 assists per game. Only played in 6 games this year. I assume he must have started the year out with injury. Lukai Patterson, a transfer from Charlotte, a 6'1" senior guard, 230 pounds, averaging 9.7 points a game. That's good for third on this team from a scoring standpoint. Also does a pretty good job from a facilitation standpoint with 3.9 assists per game as well. And then rounding out kind of those guard and wing starters, we have Femi Udakale, a 6'5" senior, 185 pounds. So just senior, basically, as we're going through these starters. Not a big time scorer, averaging 5.1 points a game, 3.2 assists, only shoots 40% from the field and a whopping 11% from the 3-point line. So not a guy that's going to be a threat there. I guess just, we've seen Mike Mitchell play, or Purdue fans have, but these other two guys, Patterson coming in from Charlotte, Femi coming in from New Mexico State University, who kind of bounced around. I think this is his fourth college now in his career. What can you tell us about those two? And then specifically, how did Mike Mitchell hurt Purdue last year, and what do they need to do against him defensively?
So yeah, I'll start with Patterson. He's kind of a combo guard where he will run point, he will run pick and roll. He'll have the ball in his hands. He does a good job facilitating and not turning it over. He's not shot the ball well at all this year, and I think the percentage this year doesn't truly reflect how he is as a shooter. I think he is a bit better than what he has shown this year. But he's a guy that he's a true combo in that will run pick and roll, but he'll also be a guy that will just spot up and shoot threes, right? I don't think you are too concerned with him right now getting a bunch of threes. And if they start falling, then you kind of adjust from there. But you don't want him to be able to have free reign of just being able to control the tempo and control the offense, because he can kind of dice you up in terms of his facilitating with that. Odikali, I'll say all three of these guards, they do a very good job of facilitating. That's where a lot of their assist numbers come from, is those three. And all three of them can handle the ball. All three of them can drive. Mitchell's the only real shooting threat right now. Odikali's, he's like a, I don't know what a good example. I don't know. Like, the only name that came to my head was Ethan Morton. Kind of that Ethan Morton in terms of like not a shooter, but he can still do other things. He's very physical. He's probably the best defender on the team. He can guard guards. He can guard some bigs. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if he gets switched onto TKR at some point defensively. Not a shooter at all. He's not a good free throw shooter. He's not a good 3-point shooter, but he's an aggressive driver, can get downhill, wants to get to the rim, and kind of facilitate from there. Pretty decent on the glass for his size as well, I think. And then Mike Mitchell is, Dawson Garcia is the 1A on this team. Mike Mitchell is the second option for Minnesota, in my opinion. He's a dude that can really shoot the ball. 48.6% from three this year. No, he was pretty high last year, 39.9%. He's a career 42% 3-point shooter. He is last year, he was more of a shooting guard, an off-ball guard. This year, he's morphed back into kind of a true point guard. He'll handle the rock a lot, does a good job running pick and roll, facilitating. He's very good on spot ups. You cannot let him get an open look at all. He will make you pay immediately. Can still put the ball on the ground a bit, get downhill. Just kind of their best overall perimeter offensive player. He can just kind of do pretty much everything that you need. I think you do want him to put the ball on the ground more than get open threes. Last year, he got a bunch of open catch and shoot threes, hit a couple tough ones in there. And that was, that Minnesota game where I think Minnesota might have even been up 8 at half, if I'm remembering, at Mackey Arena. Yeah. That's a big part of that, is Mike Mitchell being able to do that. But he's more on ball this year. And that takes away a little bit of the off-ball shooting threat, but at the same time, he can get to his pull-up, and it's not a big deal. He did. You mentioned the injury. Yeah, he sprained his ankle pretty bad in the third game and missed, I think, 7 in a row. Has played the last few games. Dawson Garcia, like I said, he's priority number 1, but Mike Mitchell is priority number 2 in terms of knowing where he's at all times.
All right. And like you said, all three of those guys' ability to drive and get downhill. A Minnesota team that doesn't shoot a ton of threes relative to percentage of overall attempts and doesn't hit a ton of them. So their ability to get downhill into the mid-range or get to the rim, either one, is important to this team. So from a Purdue perspective, defensively, going to be really important to be able to keep their man in front out on the perimeter. You mentioned Mitchell kind of being more off ball last year. And I guess one thing to mention about this Minnesota team for Purdue fans coming back to watch this group, if you haven't seen them play yet, is they lost some really important pieces off of last year's team. They lose, probably one of the 5 best point guards in the Big Ten last year in Hawkins. I think that's relatively safe to say, that we pretty sure transferred to Texas Tech. They lose the really quality freshman wing and Christie that goes into the draft, and then Pharrell Payne. that you guys saw play against Purdue at Texas A&M. So lost some really important pieces. There was kind of some chatter at one point that they might lose Garcia too. He decided to stick it out at Minnesota, and that's kind of where we're going to transition to next. And kind of go to the bigs, I guess, from that standpoint with Minnesota. Garcia is a guy, Dawson Garcia, you have to start there. Picked preseason All Big Ten this year. He was second and third on the All Big teams at the end of the year last year, one being the media's poll and the other being the coach's poll. But a guy that's been a bucket for a long time at Minnesota, that can score at all three levels and can go on heaters at time and just absolutely heat up and go off for big ones. And then on the other side of that, so senior 6'11", probably more of a power forward classification. And then Parker Fox, there's really kind of two bigs. Fox starts sometimes, Mitchell starts some other times, but we're going to go with Parker Fox here. Another senior at 6'8", I believe had 2 ACL injuries that forced him out at 2 different times, and is back at kind of closer to full strength for the first time in a while this year, averaging 7.2 points a game and 2.5 rebounds a game. I should have mentioned with Dawson Garcia this year, averaging 19.1 points a game, 7.4 rebounds, 2 assists, almost a steal a game and a block a game, and only 1.4 turnovers, while shooting 37% from 3 and 50% from the field. Garcia is a dude. And if Minnesota was a quality team at any point in the last few years, he's probably first team All Big Ten.
Yeah, and Dawson Garcia is a very, very talented scorer, very, very talented player. He can, like you said, he can do a bit of everything. He can spot up and knock down a 3. He can ISO, like I mentioned at the top of the show. They'll throw the ball to him at the elbow or kind of the high post and just kind of let him ISO from there. They'll sometimes get him true post touches closer to the block, where he wants to get to that left hand over the right shoulder more than anything is what he wants to do. Has pretty good touch, does a good job cutting, can pick and pop a bit, can roll a bit, can get out in transition the very few times that they do that. He's just kind of can do whatever. And I think I don't think I want to go too much more in depth on him, because I think when we talk Purdue, we'll talk more about how Purdue kind of can go about stopping him. Parker Fox, the other big you mentioned, he's just an energy big, does a good job protecting the rim. Probably the best rim protector on the team, and just a very high energy type player. A bit undersized for the 5, but that's he makes up for it with some athleticism, and just his ability to move. Not a shooter at all. Terrible free throw shooter, which is a common theme for this Minnesota team. I think they have 1, 2, 3, 4. They have 5 players shooting 50% or less. They have 2 players shooting under 40% from the free throw line. Parker Fox is one of those players, but high energy, good rebounder. He's not like much of an offensive threat besides at the rim, but he will cut. He has shown he can, get off the dribble a little bit if he has an open lane. Not too much of a post up type guy, but rolls, cuts, offensive glass. That's kind of is how he gets his buckets, and does a good job finishing at the rim. You mentioned Frank. Did you mention? I know you mentioned Frank Mitchell. Should I talk about him? Or?
I just kind of threw him out there. We'll go to the bench next here in just a second. But you did mention just bringing up free throws, and one thing we should probably mention too is Garcia does a really good job getting to the free throw line. Averages 6.6 attempts per game, and he is one of the guys on this team that actually shoots fairly well from the free throw line at 84%. Mike Mitchell does shoot 91%, so that helps the team average a little bit. If him and Garcia weren't shooting their percentages, this team average would be atrocious. Transitioning to the bench a little bit, though, I guess there's several guys that we should mention here. Brennan Rigsby is a transfer from Oregon, another senior guard at 6'3", 180 pounds, averaging 6.4 points a game. Not shooting from 3 very well this year at 22% on the year, even though he jacks up 4 of them a game. We've got Isaac Asuma, a freshman guard at 6'3", averaging 4.9 points a game, shooting 36% from 3 on the year. And then probably, one of the more important ones to mention here is Frank Mitchell, a 6'8" junior, 240 pounds, averaging 4.7 points a game and 3.8 rebounds a game. Somebody that's going to help kind of anchor down there in that low post. And I guess we do need to throw out Trey Edmonds, 2 from University of Texas, San Antonio, transfer, averaging 3.8 points a game. He'll average, about 10 minutes a game, so he's not going to play a ton in the rotation, but a guy that you might see out there as well.
Yeah, so Brendan Rigsby, he was the guy that this offseason I was like, this is a sneaky good pickup for Minnesota. He hasn't shot the ball well, but he does everything else pretty well. Does a good job. He's another guy that like just has some good athleticism to him that can finish at the rim, can kind of break guys down off the dribble. Has been more of a spot up shooter, and just the shooting hasn't been there. He was 35% from 3 last year on 102 attempts. He's a career 30%. So I think he's a guy you have to respect. You don't want to let him get hot, but at the same time, you maybe take a Brendan Rigsby 3 over a Dawson Garcia drive. Also a pretty good defender, I think. Probably the second best perimeter defender besides Odekali. Asama, the freshman point guard, he's good. And Minnesota long-term, like they need to be able to keep him. That would be a big cornerstone piece for them for the future. He's a guy that I think long-term will garner some NBA attention in a couple years. Does a pretty good job shooting the ball. I like his facilitating. He's still a freshman. He has those freshman mistakes where, right, he gets sped up a little bit. Maybe he can force a bit. But I think long-term he's going to be very good. And he's had games this year already where he's been very, very good. Had an 11-point performance against Wake Forest. Like nothing eye-popping, 10 points and a couple assists against Cleveland State, but a freshman that can do it and is going to be good at some point, just maybe not right now. Frank Mitchell, the backup big that also starts a bit. He's a big body. The dude is strong. He is physical. I believe he led the NCAA last year in rebounds per game, if I'm remembering correctly, or he was right up there. It was him and like Edey and one other were like top 3. That hasn't translated as much this year to Minnesota, but very, very physical body. He's another guy. He'll get a couple post ups, but oftentimes more of just kind of a roller, not a shooter at all. He's a solid rim protector. I don't think he's great. He's okay. But there's a reason I think that Fox gets a little bit more minutes. Edmonds kind of in the same boat. Edmonds is more athletic. Like Mitchell is the more physical. Edmonds is just the more athletic big of just can kind of jump pretty high. The blocks haven't shown up this year, but like I think he's a pretty good rim protector. Another non-shooter, not going to get too many minutes. He's a guy that if he's in, you kind of live with following him. He's 34% from the line this year. But yeah, so their bench is like, they have some solid players. I don't think they have any like stars off the bench by any means, but I do think all of them are capable of playing 20 plus minutes in a game if needed.
Yeah. Now that we've kind of rolled through some of these players, just maybe let's talk a little about some of the keys to the game from Purdue on both ends of the court. And for me, I think a lot of that, I guess I'll kind of go defensively first. I think a lot of that has to do with Minnesota's ability to get downhill and penetrate from the perimeter. And obviously, I think that's might come across a little odd when you have a guy in Dawson Garcia that's averaging 19 a game, but that comes from my perspective of I don't really think you're going to stop Dawson Garcia. And I think if you can just make things difficult on him and slow him down, then that's the best you're going to do, but don't let anybody else get going. And for me specifically, that's Mike Mitchell Jr. If you can kind of limit the scoring to being a Dawson Garcia fest and just try to make things a little bit more difficult on them, I really want to see Purdue's perimeter players, whoever it is that's out there on the perimeter at any given point in time, just matching up and keeping the ball in front. Because if you can limit penetration in the paint, that limits the rotations that have to be made, which forces Purdue out of position a lot of time, which not only hurts them from a defensive standpoint, protecting the rim, but also hurts them from a rebounding standpoint, because then your bigs are out of position. So that's my one big key right out of the gate is just perimeter defense play.
Yeah, and that is a big one. Dawson Garcia, he's scored less than 18 points 3 times this year, and he scored less than 13 points twice. He's going to get his. He can do it in a multitude of ways. His 2 less than 10-point games did come in close losses against better opponents for their schedule, which I think is something just to note. But yeah, I agree. Like Garcia's going to get his. If you can make life tough and make it be a little bit more inefficient, that's great. but you can't let guys like Mitchell or Patterson get going, Rigsby, like those types of dudes. If you can limit them and make Garcia have to try to go for 40, it's probably a pretty good pathway for getting a win on the road. Still have to be physical, and that's where I think I wouldn't be shocked to see more, especially with how First played against Toledo. I wouldn't be shocked to see more First in this game. First feels like the guy that has the mobility to stop Garcia more on, or try to slow down Garcia more on the perimeter, keep up with his drives, but also still have some of the physicality to contest the post ups. I know Purdue will double the post, but I would expect to see a lot more First this game.
So let me ask you this question, because that's somewhere that I wanted to go. Um, whether it's Garcia and Fox or Garcia and Mitchell that start this next game, because I think you said Mitchell had a slight injury or something, that there's reason maybe Fox started the last game. Regardless of that pairing, Garcia and whoever the other person is, how do you see Purdue matching up against that, assuming that the starting lineup is still Cam and TKR?
I would guess Heidi on Garcia and TKR on insert big. Mainly because I think you want the Heidi athleticism to try to match up with what Garcia does on the perimeter, knowing that you're just going to send a lot of help when he's on the post. That's where I would expect them to start. I also, it kind of helps potentially alleviate TKR from getting early foul trouble a little bit. Yeah. TKR still has to be good, and especially either way, if it's Fox or Mitchell, has to be good of just like boxing out and not letting them be physical and more athletic. But I think overall, Heidi on Garcia makes more sense to start.
Yeah, I was hoping that's what you would say, because with Garcia's kind of ability to draw fouls and get to the free throw lines, we've seen in a couple 3 games maybe this year that TKR has picked up a couple early, and then we've seen that rotation like forced to be changed, where maybe Burgess comes first off the bench for a few minutes until they can kind of get back into a little bit more of the regular rotation in that first half. And that worries me a little bit. Not going to lie, the Garcia on Kane matchup worries me a little bit too, because Garcia sometimes will turn and face and just shoot over guys with his height at 6'11". So I think that's a difficult matchup too. I'm 100% with you that I think the defensive matchup in this game, because of what Garcia can do at 6'11", really playing more like a power forward, lends itself to a Caleb First game alongside TKR. Not saying you're going to say a starting lineup change or anything like that, although nothing would shock me from Painter, because we've seen him do those things throughout the year at different times. But I do see that as a high minute game that way. On the flip side of that, man, that Indiana just obliterated Minnesota in the paint with their bigs in that game. And this looks like a game offensively that maybe Purdue could do those same things with TKR. In the paint, I guess, where do you see Purdue's advantages offensively attacking this team?
Yeah, so defensively against pick and roll, Minnesota is going to high hedge, but they stay at home more, where they don't want to give the kick out threes. And what that does is basically what Minnesota bets on defensively is that they don't need to always send help, because they think that they're big, or either with playing Garcia and another big pretty much the entire season. I think they've only played 6 minutes of Garcia at the 5 the whole year. Is that whichever big is not involved in the pick and roll can rotate and help protect the rim. And so they allow a lot of shots at the rim. They've done a pretty good job of defending them against inferior competition, to be fair. But you saw that in the Indiana game, right? Like you said, they just kind of dominated the paint. I forget specific stats from that game, but yeah, Ballo had 18, Renew had 16. Even some of the guards just got downhill, got into the mid range. So TKR should need to have another big game, should have a big game. That short roll should be there. Maybe the way they get the open threes is the TKR short roll and defenses have to collapse. That is where this could be a game. If Heidi, like, it would be maybe big for Heidi to be able to knock down one or two, because oftentimes he'll probably be the one open, knowing that Garcia is going to rotate. But TKR is going to be the primary guy, I think, offensively, of just being able to get into the paint. Maybe Braden can do it too. I mean, Braden can kind of do whatever he wants. I do think also with this Minnesota hedge, it's more of just like a stunt oftentimes, and less of like I'm going to pressure the ball and try to trap and force a turnover. And so I could see Braden even turning the corner some. And so where then he's getting downhill and now he's finding either TQR on the roll, a kick out, or like he did against Toledo, just getting to his own shot. So I think there are plenty of ways that Purdue can go about their normal business and just kind of get good looks against Minnesota. Got to handle the ball still, even if Minnesota doesn't force a ton of turnovers naturally. Have to be good on the glass. They're not a great rebounding team. But yeah, and then knock down open ones. Like they're at some point going to get some open threes. At some point, Colvin, Heidi, I Lawyer got back on track. Those guys just got to knock some down.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously, I'm assuming a decent amount of people that follow us on Twitter too. Saw some of the stuff that I put out last night about like top 3% concentration of scoring and fourth score, yada yada yada. And this Purdue team isn't necessarily all that much different than some of Purdue's other really good teams, but it's not necessarily an anomaly, I guess, for a Purdue team. That doesn't mean that Purdue doesn't need a fourth scorer to emerge. It's also not even halfway through the season, so you could definitely still. There's years in there, right? In those previous years, Carson Edwards' freshman year, where he develops into that fourth scorer as it goes on. Zach Edey was that fourth scorer his freshman year. That developed and came on as the year went on. And we're also in just a little bit of swing of Miles and Cam not necessarily having great games, but I think it's also important to remember we're only 4 games removed, right, from Cam scoring 15 against Maryland. We're only 6 games away from him scoring whatever it was against North Carolina State, from Miles going off for 20 in that tournament in San Diego State. Both of them have 9 against Texas A&M. They just both laid goose eggs against Toledo and Auburn, right? A fourth scorer probably needs to emerge a little bit more, but I think we're also looking at a little bit of a microcosm of the season and maybe overreacting a little bit to that potentially. But it would definitely be nice to obviously see those guys get going again, or whether that's the fact that CJ emerges a little bit more as that fourth option. He's actually been that fourth option over the last 5 games, averaging almost double what the other two have in that same time frame. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Any other big comments you want to address towards this game, things that have to be done?
I would like to see Purdue get out and run a little bit if they can. Like, I don't want to see this game be a sub 60 possession game. And I would like, or even just in the half court, I know Purdue's not going to push the pace a ton. I would just like to see just a little bit and not let Minnesota absolutely control the tempo. Like, I don't think they need to be running gun and 70 plus possessions, but get to 64, 65, 66 possessions, make Minnesota a little bit more uncomfortable with playing in that area. It's probably the only other thing I really have to say.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great call because anytime a team really wants to slow it down, if you can kind of break them and force them to play a little bit different way than they want to, that's certainly going to lead to good things. You saw Purdue last night, or not? Was that last night? Did we play Toledo last night? You saw Purdue yesterday, a Toledo team that came in not turning the ball over hardly at all, forcing them, I think, 5 or 6 above their season average. So if they could kind of get after Minnesota a little bit, or even off of misses, just pushing the pace. You saw both Braden and CJ kind of doing that a little bit in that Toledo game, but it was nice to see a second person. Jakari did it too at one point in that game where you were seeing more than just Braden grabbing the ball and go. So yeah, I'm 100% with you there. Excited about the game on Thursday, getting into Big Ten play, some games here in this stretch that they have to win. I'll give it to you, Joe, to sign off.
Yeah, it's start a Big Ten play. It's back to 2 a week. This is the first of 3 games in the span of 7 days, 4 games in 10 days. Like, it just kind of keeps going. It is the Big Ten grind. It is back. We will have all the coverage that you need in terms of previews, post-game shows right here on the YouTube channel. So make sure to like, subscribe, turn on bell notifications, and you will get notified as soon as we go live or post one of these previews. Appreciate everybody tuning in. It is Purdue versus Minnesota, Thursday, January 2nd, 8 p.m. Eastern time tip on Fox Sports 1, and we will be live after the game. So we will see you then.